Hello and welcome to Teaching TF2. My name is Kevin Espone. Quick little background on me. I was an ESEA IM player before quitting due to time constraints to become a teacher. So I have a pretty uniquely positioned background to be able to teach TF2 and play TF2 at a pretty good level on both fronts. I also was the longtime head admin of the North American 6v6 Newbie Mixes, which is now a decade-old organization that has brought in thousands of players to start playing competitive TF2. In the past few months of 2020, as a teacher, I have actually genuinely missed teaching my students at school. And so I came back and taught people some stuff about TF2. I didn't realize as it was happening, but now that I've gotten to the end of the season teaching my truly amazing students, I've looked back at what I did across the season, and I used all of the educational best practices that I used throughout my teaching career thus far and applied them to TF2 without even really thinking about it. So I'm going to tell you how you can do those same things to hopefully get similar results with your coaching as my newbies were able to deliver with my coaching. They went in, they lost their first game of amateur 5-0. It was real bad. We were really nervous there for a little bit, but now they, knock on wood, are the top seed in amateur playoffs that's still in, and we're hoping that they take that W. So yeah, these concepts, they work, especially if the students work really hard, which is what our newbie team absolutely did this season. So, without further ado, let's get into it. In this guide, I'm going to be talking about some educational best practices that can be applied directly to teaching TF2, and also just anything in life in general. This isn't just something that will only apply to TF2. A lot of the things that we talk about are going to make you better at teaching TF2, yes, but they're also probably going to make you better at TF2 if you're not a top player. And they're also just going to make you better at being a leader at whatever job you currently have or will end up having in the future. So it's just knowing how people learn is a very effective life skill. That said, as probably everybody is aware, there are good and bad teachers. There are teachers that know how to teach and use educational best practices, and then there are teachers that are not good at teaching that do not use educational best practices. We're going to get into a few concepts that kind of cover these educational best practices, but before we do that, I want to make sure that you really understand TF2. And not just like you can play it and you're pretty good at it, but do you actually understand what's going on in every game of TF2 that you play? And so some good indicators for that are the following questions. Do you know ahead of most team fights what the end result of the team fight is likely going to be? Do you rarely find yourself confused as to why something played out the way that it did? i.e., like, what are we doing? Why are we losing? Those two questions, if you ask yourself and really think about it, a lot of players that are really good at the game will actually say no. And if you've never actively thought ahead in a game of TF2, or if you just go through the motions of how each map is played, you likely don't have a core understanding of how the game works. That doesn't mean you're a bad player, but that may just mean that you don't have a deep understanding of what actually makes the game tick. Understanding maps, to be clear, does not convert into understanding the core game. Knowing how maps play is good enough to play the game at an extremely high level, and lots of players do an exceptional job of that. But to teach, you probably are going to need a deeper understanding of the game, and we'll talk about the educational reasons behind that reasoning here in just a little bit. If you understand the game, if I ask those two questions and you're like, duh, then that's great. If not, here are the basics. These are the things that you should understand at a very in-depth level to understand how competitive TF2 works. I've done my best to compress it down to one sentence. All competitive TF2 play is focused around utilizing your advantages to initialize fights that your team has a high probability of winning, while being cognizant of your opponent's advantages and playing in a way that minimizes them. I'm going to read that one more time. All competitive TF2 play is focused around utilizing your advantages to initialize fights that your team has a high probability of winning, while being cognizant of your opponent's advantages and playing in a way that minimizes them. So some examples of this. The leapfrogging that happens on most 5CP maps is just the ultimate realization of how that works. And if you have an uber advantage but you're holding your second and pushing into mid, you can expect for the other team to be playing passive to get your force and get out of the mid. It's all pretty straightforward. TF2 is really simple to play after you get a basic grasp on it. This guide is not to teach you how to play TF2 though, so that you can go teach other people. That would be a very long video. If you want to learn how to play competitive TF2, you need to learn hands-on. That's going to be most of what I'm saying in here, with some details for coaches to help teach a hands-on game of TF2. Come play a newbie mix if you're brand new. If you have some experience, play in a league and work your way up. That is how you can get better individually at the game. So, the basic educational concepts that we are going to be using to understand how to best teach Team Fortress 2, there's 3 of them. If you've ever taken a childhood development course or basics of education course, anything like that, these will sound familiar. And if not, don't worry, we're going to cover them here. The first thing we're going to talk about is a little bit of a twofer. It is the zone of proximal development and scaffolding. The zone of proximal development is often thought of as a circle inside of a circle inside of a circle. And in a sort of like Venn diagram way, I don't know exactly what it would be called though. In the very center of your circle, you have your comfort zone. Inside that comfort zone, there is no growth to be had. You know all of the things that you need to know within your comfort zone, and there isn't anything to learn there. Just beyond your comfort zone is the zone of proximal development. That is the zone in which learning happens. It is the zone in which you don't quite understand, but it is close enough to your level of understanding that you can learn it. That is the zone that learning happens in. And then the final outer ring, the largest circle that both of those are in, the largest circle is the discomfort zone. It is the zone in which there is no hope for you to learn anything in. So, essentially what we do as teachers is we make sure that we are spending as much of our time in that ever-changing middle ring inside the zone of proximal development. And what we do there is called scaffold. Scaffolding is an educational term that is used to describe supporting students while they are learning new skills. The phrase scaffolding comes obviously from the actual building material, the scaffolding that you use to create buildings or to work on outside of buildings. It is essentially the concept of working your way up from the bottom and going up to higher order skills. And essentially, the teacher helps the students initially. The teacher guides the student from the comfort zone to the zone of proximal development without pushing too far into the discomfort zone. And the teacher assists the student in hands-on learning. And then, once the student can do the hands-on learning by themselves, the teacher takes a backseat role. So the learning becomes student-focused instead of teacher-focused. So again, zone of proximal development is the zone that we are learning in, and scaffolding is the teacher moving the student from the comfort zone to not the discomfort zone, but to the zone of proximal development where they can learn best. This is all obviously oversimplifications. These are very in-depth educational philosophies, and this is just a quick rundown. Moving on to our next educational concept, Bruner's theory of learning. Essentially, what Bruner says is that there are 3 basic steps of education. It starts with hands-on action. So, in our case, playing the video game. That's why newbie mixes exist in the way that they do, and that it's not just like a video tutorial series. Step 1 is always doing the thing. Step 2 is learning with content. So like that can be images. For us, it is demo files. It is like the .dems that pros can record that we can watch, and that newbies can record and that they can watch themselves. That's step 2. Step 3 is transforming ideas into language. So, hands-on action. You play in a newbie mix. Learning with images or demo files. You apply the things that you had experienced firsthand in the action of the game. You watch a higher level player than you, and then you watch your own demo, and you can learn that way. And then transforming those ideas into language. In the case of TF2, being able to call very clearly exactly what you want to do in your push. Moving on to our last educational concept, it is called Bloom's Taxonomy. It is essentially a sort of hierarchy of cognition that starts from very rudimentary learning and goes all the way up to extremely high order thinking. So it starts down at the bottom with remember, then goes to understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and create. Remember is essentially like rote learning. It is learning the callouts on the map. It is learning your rollout. It is learning the most basic things about the game. Understand is the next level. It is the level at which, unfortunately, most people end up quitting before fully grasping it. And it is essentially the ability to kind of know what's going on in any given moment. It is the ability to know where you're supposed to stand for a passive hold versus an aggressive hold at a certain point on a certain map. That is an understanding. Next is applying, and it is the ability to take your knowledge, take your understanding of the things that you remembered, and make them useful within an actual game. So knowing that you have mid but uber disadvantage, you need to apply your understanding of passive holds into that situation by playing in a passive hold, getting a force as the team comes in from second with their uber, and leaving. Up next is analyze. So analyze is a little bit more tricky within the context of TF2. It doesn't happen at lower levels for the most part, and it is really thinking critically about your play. It is watching team demos, it is watching higher level demos, and it is making adjustments based on all of your prior knowledge and what you think will happen in the future. Next is evaluating. You will evaluate the enemy's play and how it may affect your understanding and application of the things that you remember, right? So you will evaluate that, oh, this demo man on the team that we're playing against is really good, and he loves to bomb in through choke on an uber ad push, so we need to make sure that we do something to counter that. And that is where creation comes in. When you are actively thinking about all of the decisions that you are making, you are not simply reciting a list of holds and pushes that you have practiced specifically with your team, but instead you are constantly playing a new game. You are using your base of knowledge, all of the things that you remember. You are using your understanding of the game and your ability to apply those understandings, along with your ability to analyze and evaluate your situations to constantly create new things. So that is our ultimate goal as teachers of TF2, is to give all of our students everything in that list so that they can truly play the game at a high level, which if they are going to do by using brain instead of clicking people real good, that is what needs to happen. And that is what most top teams have at least one player that is really, really good at that, at calling pushes and letting their team know exactly what needs to happen. Our goal with the newbie team drive is to get teams to usually about the analyze, but sometimes as far as the create phase of their play. Our goal with newbie mixes is to get the newbies to an understanding along with an ability to kind of apply some of the skills or some of the understanding that they have. So let's really quickly talk about how those educational concepts work within TF2. Before we hop into that, we really need to talk about one thing that is not listed in our educational concepts, and that is building a relationship with the people that you are teaching. Just like I would not get very much teaching done in my classroom if I did not build relationships with my students, it's not going to happen in-game either. So whether you're watching this video because you are hoping to be a newbie mix coach or a team drive coach or an RGL Cup coach or any kind of coach in TF2, or you're watching it because you want to better help your team understand the game, you cannot force concepts onto people. You have to work with them to help them learn, because you can't make somebody learn something else that they don't want to learn. So you have to build up a positive, respectful relationship with either the people that you are teaching or the people that you are playing with in order to do these things. The first step in building that relationship actually ties into the first step of going through teaching through proper educational concepts. So there's going to be a lot that happens in your very first teaching session, whatever you want to call it. You build up a positive rapport with your students, newbies, whatever you want to call them, by establishing where they are. You can't dive into teaching if you don't know where your student's zone of proximal development is, right? So remember, the zone of proximal development is the region in which learning can happen, the not too hard, not too easy zone, right? So in order to establish that zone of proximal development, you just need to meet your players. You need to talk with your players. If you're in a newbie mix, you quickly just ask them what their competitive experience is. If you are coaching their team, you will watch them play a few scrims before their season starts. If you are with the cup, you will learn over the first match or two what players' strengths and weaknesses are and where you can go from there. From there, it's time to work on remembering. So the first step of Bloom's taxonomy. So remember, Bloom's taxonomy is the 6 steps: remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create, whereas Bruner's theory of learning is a little bit more vague and talks about the actual acquisition of this learning through hands-on action, learning with, in our case, demo files and team reviews, and then transforming those ideas into language, in our case, comms. So I'm mainly going to be talking about Bloom's taxonomy, which is those 6 steps to getting a deep understanding of the content. And then Bruner's theory and the proximal development and scaffolding apply to all of these steps within Bloom's taxonomy. I think I said that right. So the first step is to get them to know the basic things that they need to know. What is everything on the map called? Why is it called that way is actually a very helpful thing. So if you're teaching process, it is a fun little bit of trivia to explain why sewer is called sewer, because it used to be a sewer. And I think those little anecdotes actually help with the brute memorization of the aspect, because they can tie their understanding of that into something else. You can say, oh, it's a sewer. It was similar to kind of the 2-fort sewers, in that you could just go through the sewer. There was a little room, and then there was another sewer. It was a sewer. that will help them remember, right? So you want to do everything you can to just not make it absolute boring brute force memorization. You try to keep it interesting. So they need to know all of the callouts, obviously. They need to know the basics of what makes up a combo and what makes up a flank. They need to know kind of where to stand in a passive hold and an aggressive hold. They don't, at that point, need to know what those holds are used for, because remember, the first step within Bruner's theory of learning is hands-on, right? It is much better for that player to just play the game and experience the passive hold and the aggressive hold rather than deeply contextualize and understand those things before ever doing them. So in your newbie mix or in your scrims for the team that you're coaching, you can micro them a little bit. You don't want to micro everything, but you can say, hey, it's time for a passive hold on second. It's time for an aggressive hold on second. No team that they're scrimming against in super low level TF2 should complain about like a coach speccing and helping out a team, because that just means that they're playing against a better team than they otherwise would have been, which is obviously helpful for them. Just don't ghost. Anyways, so you are getting them to just remember things. It is really important for them to get that core understanding of what things are called and where they stand for certain holds before moving on to the second step, which is understanding. Understanding is essentially the knowledge of, okay, I need to stand exactly in this spot for a passive hold, because when the enemy team comes into me and we get the force, I need to be able to leave. So the understanding of what they're doing comes pretty quickly after the memorization happens. Because obviously it does, because people learn by doing. And if they've done it a few times, then they'll see like, oh, and then we can just repush. And that's where apply comes in. So they are able to apply these skills after they have learned to, they've done the rote learning of just the raw information. They have a basic understanding of how it works. And then very soon after that comes the application of that knowledge. In the application step, the student understands, okay, we just won the mid fight, but we lost our medic. So we're going to get our medic up, we're going to buff up, then we're going to start building, and we are going to make sure that the enemy team uses their Uber as they come from second into mid as we leave mid and go to our second. So that way we can just leapfrog and come back into mid, and if we all play it really well, then we will have built up an advantage by doing that. That is the application step, where they have the root knowledge, they have a basic understanding of how it works so that they can apply it in their scrims and matches. That is the apply stage of Bloom's taxonomy. The application phase, in my mind, is when TF2 actually starts getting super, super fun. When you're able to work small advantages by understanding what is happening in the game and remembering all of your raw information, that's when the game starts getting really fun, and you can use your team fighting and DM abilities to really have a good time fighting whatever team you're playing, right? After apply is analyze. And analysis is just the next step up from application. Analysis is really critically thinking about what you are doing as a team so that you can get better as a team, and that you're thinking really critically about what you are doing as a player so that you can get better as a player. So you are not just using the second little bit from Bruner with the learning with images and a demo file by watching a high-level player, right? You are actually critically analyzing your own demos and learning how to get better from there by using all of your prior things that you know, all of the brute things that you memorized in the remember stage, all of the things that you understand and applied. Then you can analyze your play and make it even better. At that point, that is when the coach becomes less important. So it is really our goal to drive our teams to the analyze phase and then back off and help with analysis and evaluation creation. Speaking of evaluation and creation, the way that I think about it within the context of TF2 is that you evaluate in-game what the enemy team is doing. I mentioned this briefly earlier. So you have done all the brute memorization. You have a basic understanding of what you do. You are able to apply that basic understanding, and you are analyzing to get better at what you do. But then comes the evaluating stage where you see, okay, we're playing against this team. They have these players. Their scout is really good. Their roamer is not so hot. Their demo feeds. Like, those are the things that you notice as scrims go on or as individual games and matches go on. You evaluate what the other team is doing. You evaluate the situation that you are put in, and you see how your analysis from earlier and your application of your understanding of the things you remember, right? You are evaluating how you can go up to the very last level and create new ideas and strategies within the game. And that is the point where you can counter other players' flaws really effectively, because you're not memorizing a set list of plays. You're not holding in the exact same spot every single time. You are constantly changing what you are doing to counter the other team. And all of that constant adjustment is happening at high-level TF2 all the time. There is like a sort of Dunning-Kruger like peak group of people in TF2 that think that sixes is like this never-changing foundational thing that is just boring because it's the same thing over and over. But it is actually like it's not complicated, but it is a deeply interesting game because of how you can create constantly within it and constantly evolve your strategies to adjust for the other teams. So that is how you can apply some of these very basic concepts from the world of education into teaching and understanding TF2. I just want to wrap up with just the last kind of philosophy that I have on teaching TF2 that is actually not super related to educational best practice, but is instead related deeply to how TF2 as a game works. I'm going to reread what I said at the very beginning of this lecture, which is all competitive TF2 play is focused around utilizing your advantages to initialize fights that your team has a high probability of winning, while being cognizant of your opponent's advantages and playing in a way that minimizes them. Through the educational concepts that we use, you should teach your team how to properly think about risk versus reward and how to really utilize statistics of different plays. And it's not like pulling out the spreadsheets. It is just like thinking critically about some things. The biggest issue that I see that new players have is that they get drawn into the scene by watching stream highlight clips of like high-level pickup games where like the phrase like going for a play means something, but they don't know what it means, and they see on the streams that people just jump in and go crazy, and the new players will see that and try to emulate that. Again, that kind of goes hand in hand with Bruner and the learning with images, right? That's what it is. It is a sort of like misstep of learning in that way. And so it's really important to teach risk versus reward. What is your end goal here? Like, what is the reward in the best case scenario? And what is the risk involved with getting that reward? And then from there, thinking, okay, if I go for this play, the ultimate risk is that we are then down a player. And everything about TF2 tells us that the team that has 5 players on it versus the team that has 6 is less likely to win, right? So it's really important to strongly emphasize to our students that going for a play is not particularly helpful. In fact, it is quite harmful to the overall average success of a team. You may get a play every once in a while, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea to go for it, because on average you are hurting your team. So you have to do the thing that lets statistics favor your side, which is play really cleanly, play really effective leapfrogging, and stay alive unless the reward that you get by bombing in is worth the downside of you being dead. In a similar vein, you can't play to not lose. If you are always on the retreat, if you are always giving up free space, you will not win on average. So your goal should be to set yourself up to win on average and then move up from there. If you are always giving up points for free, space for free, fights for free, then you won't on average have a chance of winning the game. So to wrap up, we are understanding that we need to build a relationship to our students and then push them into their zone of proximal development, which is, again, their not too hot, not too cold area of learning. We can get them there by scaffolding, helping them initially, holding their hands a little bit, but then letting them go, taking off the training wheels. We keep our students in the zone of proximal development by constantly pushing them and not letting them settle into their area of comfort. We do that while making sure that we don't push too hard to where they end up in their area of discomfort. Reminder, we are using Bruner's theory, which emphasizes hands-on action being the first step of learning, then learning with other information, so in our case, demo files and team discussions, before finally being able to transform those ideas into language. We utilize Bruner's theory of learning at every single level of Bloom's taxonomy, all the way from remember to create. Quick rundown. Remember is just the brute information that has to be memorized, the callouts, the locations, the basics of holds. Then understanding what those holds are for, applying, being able to know which kind of hold to use in what kind of situation in game, followed by analyzing, being able to understand and critically reflect on what you have done in the past to get better in the future, followed by evaluate, where you are constantly figuring out what the enemy team is doing and how that plays into your application of your understanding, which then leads you to create and really think about the game critically. I know that is an absolutely unreasonable amount of information to cram into about half an hour of voice. So just like I said at the beginning, you can listen to this while DMing or surfing. These are the understanding of how learning is achieved is deeply important, not just in TF2. So you may learn these pillars of education through the context of teaching TF2 because you have some friends that you want to show into the game, or you just want to help the scene stay healthy and alive. Like, that's awesome, but these applications are effective in every single job that you're ever going to have, especially if you want to work your way up that job, right? TF2 is a great, playground for getting practical experience doing a whole bunch of things, whether that is like running servers or teaching new players things or helping run an organization. It's really helpful, and this is one of the ways that I think you can do that. And I hope that you listen back through a couple times so that you can really internalize these thought processes, and keep in mind that all this video is within Bloom's taxonomy is the brute memorization and the beginnings of understanding. And you have a whole long way ahead of you of actually applying that knowledge, analyzing how it works with your students, evaluating, and creating your own content from there. I hope that you have a great time teaching this awesome game, and I really, really appreciate the fact that you are teaching players how to play this game, because it's helping it stay alive, which means that, once in a blue moon when I want a pug, there's always players there, which is very important to me. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.